Okay, folks, part 2 of First Maccabees, First and Second Maccabees. See if I can get through First Maccabees here. I want to read the entirety of chapter 2 for you because these two chapters are great. They kind of set up the whole story. So, and once we get through chapter 2, we're going to kind of just kind of touch down like a skipping stone across the pond. We're going to skip it across this whole big pond, this 30-page pond. Chapter 2, I want to read the whole thing in its entirety. This is great. In those days, Mattathias, the son of John, son of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Joarib, moved from Jerusalem and settled in Modane, because it was just getting too rough. He had 5 sons: John, surnamed Gadi, Simon, called Thassi, Judas, called Maccabees, and Eleazar, called Avaran, and Jonathan, called Aphas. He saw the blasphemies being committed in Judah and Jerusalem and said, "Alas, why was I born to see this?" This is a great lament here in classic style. So there's a lot of little homages here, homages to other parts of the scriptures, whether it's Moses or Joshua, Abraham and Isaac. In Second Maccabees, you can definitely think of Abraham and Isaac, some of the brutal, sacrificial nature of what's happening there. Of these martyrdoms. The rabbis would connect that to Abraham and Isaac. And the faithfulness of that woman in Second Maccabees, letting her sons die, is very much like Abraham on Mount Moriah. All right, so there's other little things like Moses, like Joshua, like David, Saul, conquest, Samuel. It's just Gideon, definitely Gideon, when I hear this, almost sounds like a lament, like Jeremiah or like Job or something. "Alas, why was I born to see this, the ruin of my people, the ruin of the holy city, and to dwell there when it was given over to the enemy, the sanctuary given over to aliens?" Verse 8, "Her temple has become like a man without honor. Her glorious vessels have been carried into captivity. Her babes have been killed in her streets, her youths by the sword of the foe. What nation has not inherited her palaces and has not seized her spoils? All her adornment has been taken away. No longer free, she has become a slave. And behold, our holy place, our beauty, and our glory have been laid waste. The Gentiles have profaned it. Why should we live any longer?" Gosh, sounds like Moses, sounds like Job. Who else said that? More of the prophets said that. I'm trying to think who. Jonah said that, of course. Just kill me now, Verse 14, "And Mattathias and his sons rent their clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned greatly. Then the king's officers who were enforcing the apostasy," these king's officers, they're forcing the Jews to do this, to commit apostasy, "came to the city of Modane." Dun, dun, dun. Here comes the conflict now between these guys are about to boil over, Mattathias and his sons. And here come the king's officers coming to Modane outside the city, this village. There's going to be sparks, to make them offer sacrifice. Boy, are these guys in for a rude surprise. I was going to say a rude awakening, but they're about to be put to sleep. They're about to be lights out. "Many from Israel came to them, and Mattathias and his sons were assembled. Then the king's officer spoke to Mattathias as follows: You're a leader, honored and great in this city and supported by sons and brothers. Now, be the first to come and do what the king commands, as all the Gentiles and the men of Judah and those that are left in Jerusalem have done. Then you and your sons will be numbered among the friends of the king. And you and your sons will be honored with silver and gold and many gifts. Gosh, ouch. This is like, Luke Skywalker being kind of seduced to the dark side by the emperor. You want this, don't you? He's destroying his friends. And anyway, that's a great scene in Return of the Jedi. But Mattathias, verse 19, but Mattathias answered and said in a loud voice, even if all the nations that live under the rule of the king obey him and have chosen to do his commandments, departing each one from the religion of his fathers, all these Gentile pagans, yeah, they're committing apostasy, but the gods they're apostatizing from aren't even gods, Yet I and my sons and my brothers will live by the covenant of our fathers. Far be it from us. Is there in a covenant? A covenant, that's unique to the Jews. I don't think the pagans had a covenant with their God. Okay? The Gentiles, their God wasn't making a covenant with them. The idea of a covenant is you enter into a sacred family bond. There's different types of covenants. Vassal covenants. There's kind of a slave master covenant. And there's, the highest form of covenant is like definitely something that Israel is supposed to have. And at least had in the beginning. And that is, a covenant based in God's steadfast love and a partnership that makes one family. They aren't part of the family of God. I wouldn't say any of these Gentiles are pagans. So notice this awareness in verse 20 of the covenant. Yet I and my sons and my brothers will live by the covenant of our fathers. We are in a covenant with our God. You got to respect that. We've made a covenant with him. The ancient world understood covenant. Okay? So we have a different relationship with our God here in Israel. You got to understand us. Don't try to get us to eat that stuff or sacrifice. Because we have entered into a solemn covenant. Do you get that? God has made a covenant with us and we've made a covenant with him. We simply can't do that. Far be it from us to desert the law and the ordinances. We will not obey the king's words by turning aside from our religion to the right hand or to the left. When he had finished speaking these words, a Jew came forward. This is where it sounds an awful lot like that guy in on the plains of Moab, the book of Numbers. And he goes into that Moabite woman in the tent. Phinehas comes in and whoosh with the spear. When he had finished speaking these words, a Jew came forward in the sight of all to offer sacrifice upon the altar in Modin, according to the king's command. When Mattathias saw it, he burned with zeal and his heart was stirred. He gave vent to righteous anger. He ran and killed him upon the altar. Verse 25. At the same time, he killed the king's officers who was forcing them to sacrifice, and he tore down the altar. Thus he burned with zeal for the law as Phinehas did against Zimri the son of Salu. Just like Phinehas. So a lot of little homages here, to the great heroes of the Old Testament in 1 Maccabees. Now, this is his Braveheart moment, man. This is a breakout moment. This is like you're terrified of the bully. There's a bully bullying you, but you cross the fulcrum point. It's like milk. You got milk on the stove, and the boiling point comes, and man, you better be ready because it goes bananas. You better be on top of it. Boy, it happened so quick. And that's what's happening here. You could burn that milk in a hurry. This guy was, ready to blow, boy. He was like Mount Vesuvius or something, sitting there watching this go down. These are some tough boys. These king's officers, these guys were flunkies. I don't know how much they were getting paid to do this, to go out to this far-flung village of Modane. They had no idea what they were about to step on was one enormous landmine. And it detonates, and this is the point of detonation right here, ground zero of everything that's going to follow now. This is his Braveheart moment. William of Wallace begins the revolt against England in Scotland. Verse 27, then Mattathias cried out in the city with a loud voice, saying, let everyone who is zealous for the law and supports the covenant come out with me. And he and his sons fled to the hills and left all that they had in the city. Would you go? Don't you feel it? Do you feel your blood rising a little bit? Don't you want to just grab your sword and go? Your bow, your spear? I mean, these guys could lead. These guys were leaders, inspiring characters, man, to do what they did. These real historical guys. This family, it's impressive what they pulled off and accomplished. No doubt about it. Verse 29, then many who were seeking righteousness and justice went to the wilderness to dwell there. They, their sons, their wives, and their cattle. I think I'm going to start skipping a little bit at this point because I got to the juiciest stuff. I wanted to set up this whole book. Now it's launched. So let's just skip around a little bit. What's going to happen now is some people are going to escape. They're going to flee from Jerusalem and so forth. But they're going to get tracked down, chased down, hiding in caves and stuff. And they're going to be attacked on the Sabbath day because they knew they wouldn't fight back. And 800 of them get killed. Actually, 1,000 of them. 1,000 persons are slaughtered of those refugees escaping because they didn't fight back. So what does Mattathias do? Well, he says here in verse 41, let us fight against every man who comes to attack us on the Sabbath day. That's one of the controversial points in this book. All right. So anyway, they struck down sinners and lawless men, even amongst the Jews. In verse 44. And in verse 46, they forcibly circumcised all the uncircumcised boys. So these guys were pretty, it's a little rough around the edges here. And then verse 48, they rescued the law out of the hands of the Gentiles and kings, and they never let the sinner gain the upper hand. Verse 50, show zeal for the law and give your lives for the covenant of our fathers. It's admirable. And then he goes on to list a whole bunch of these great heroes of salvation history to stir them up. This is like this big, pep rally here. I mean, this is like a coach's halftime speech. I mean, he's just, it's like a recruiting pitch. Look, remember Abraham, Joseph, Phineas, Joshua, Caleb, David, Elijah, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, Daniel. And gets him pumped up. Sign right here. Put your X. Verse 61. Observe from generation to generation that none who put their trust in him will lack strength. Do not fear the words of a sinner, for his splendor will turn into dung and worms. Today he will be exalted, but tomorrow he will not be found, because he has returned to the dust, and his plans will perish. That's going to be a theme throughout the book. Lysias, Antiochus, Epiphanes, their plans don't work out. They're going to find, wow, this did not happen the way I expected it was going to happen. This is an interesting theme in the book. His plans will perish. My children, be courageous and grow strong in the law, for by it you will gain honor. All right, chapter 3. Here comes Judas Maccabeus. This guy's a stud, man. This is an awesome guy, Judas Maccabees. My goodness gracious. Whew. Judas Maccabees, I would not want to have to fight that guy. I wouldn't want to have to meet him, confront him in battle. He'd be somebody you would follow anywhere, though. He searched out and pursued the lawless in verse 5, and lawless men in verse 6, evildoers. All right, the word there is anomia, okay? Lawlessness. That's the lawless one. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, St. Paul talks about the Antichrist as the lawless one. Okay, same word, anomia. That literally means like the alpha privative A or alpha attached to another word kind of reverses or negates it. So nomos is law. So you put the alpha privative on there, this alpha, this A, anomia. What do you have? The opposite of the law, lawlessness. Okay? The lawless men and workers of evil. I have evildoers here, but really if you look at the Greek Septuagint translation, it's just workers of anomia. So anyway, that is an important theme in the book. The lawless. And the ungodly, asabia is an interesting word, Christ came to die for the asabia. The ungodly is how that's translated. And that's a very interesting word. St. Paul will just, it's used a lot in the New Testament, but let's just look at one example of it in Paul here, chapter 5, verse 6. While we were yet helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. We didn't deserve it. God shows his love for us that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. He died for the asabia, the ungodly. So, but here they are, the hammers going around destroying the ungodly. Just interesting. Contrast the ways of Christ, who's going to bring about a worldwide conquest. And these guys, they're going to swing a sword. It's pretty impressive, but they're all going to die by the sword. All of them are going to get it eventually. It's like a Greek tragedy, man. They all die. Sorry to spoil the book for you, but each one of these guys, eventually, one after another, they get hacked down. Ambushed, sabotaged, all kinds of, traps and terrible things done. Now, Saron is this first Syrian army, and he's going to make a name for himself here in verse 14. Dad never say that. I'm going to make a name for myself. I'm going to go out and make a name for myself. Oh, watch out. That's what they said at Babel. Let us build this tower. Let us make a name for ourselves. That's what David did. He made a name for himself. And then what did he do immediately after that? He went up on the rooftop, saw Bathsheba, slept with her, had a child by her, had her husband murdered, and he just committed he broke all 10 commandments. I mean, I don't know how many of the commandments he broke, but he broke pretty much all of them. After saying that, don't set out to make a name for yourself. And win honor in the kingdom. I will make war on Judas and his companions who scorned the king's command. Now we see what we're going to hear throughout this thing, and this kind of harkens back to the story of Gideon. Okay, in the book of Judges, chapter 7, Gideon, remember God pares down his army to 300 guys to fight against the Midianites. Okay, how can we, few as we are, fight against so great and strong a multitude, and we are faint, for we have eaten nothing today? It's like these starved, burned out, Scotsmen, these Highlanders, all dirty. They've been running, and they got no armor. They got these, crude implements, for battle. And here come these these rank upon rank of British troops, infantry, marching over the crest of the hill in matching uniforms and armor. And this ragtag bunch of Highlanders. And some of those battle scenes are great. But they win. The Highlanders fight like warrior poets. And because they're fighting for their homeland, they're fighting for their country, they're fighting like the Viet Cong, okay, like the Confederates, like Robert E. Lee in the South, man. When your country's invaded, you fight like a cat. You're not just some mercenary, okay? You fight for all you're worth, man. I mean, that's what's going on here. But they look out and they see that army, this great army of this guy, Saron, the Syrian army. And this guy's coming down there. He's all full of himself, wants to make a name for himself. He's like, hey, here's an opportunity I can seize upon. I'm going to stamp out this rebellion and make a name for myself. So he rolls up with his big old army. And man, the followers of Judas Maccabees, the hammer, they look out at that army and they're daunted. They're intimidated. And how can we, few as we are, fight against so great and strong a multitude? And we haven't even eaten anything. We're like half dead. Judas replied, it is easy for many to be hemmed in by few, for in the sight of heaven there is no difference between saving by many or by few. It is not on the size of the army that victory in battle depends, but strength comes from heaven. And they come against us in great pride and lawlessness to destroy us and our wives and our children and to spoil us. But we fight for our lives and our laws. Whew! He himself will crush them before us. As for you, do not be afraid of them. This is like the Battle of Britain. You know, never in the course of human history have so many been so grateful to so few. Isn't that what Churchill said about those Spitfire pilots that staved off a German invasion because the Luftwaffe just couldn't stamp them out? Those annoying Spitfires just were the fly in the ointment. The great Battle of Britain. And those guys were impressive. You know, they saved the world, not only the British nation, but the world. What if Britain got invaded by Germany? I mean, the whole war could have been different, you know, without those Spitfire pilots. You know, what were they doing? They were fighting for their lives, for their homeland, okay? I mean, one Spitfire pilot I heard in a documentary famously said, hey, I'm up there fighting so that these guys don't drop a bomb on my grandmom, all right? He said it in a funnier way than that, in a kind of a flippant British way that cracked me up. It was more humorous, but it got the point across. Like, I don't want them dropping a ding-dang bomb on my grandma. When he finished speaking, he rushed suddenly against Saron and his army, and they were crushed before him. I wonder what the Hebrew word is there. Crushed, you know? I mean, here comes the hammer. He just dropped the hammer on them, boy. The Maccabees. And just smashed them to bits. They were crushed before him. Like that devastating blow I leveled on our patio, my ceremonial whack with the sledgehammer. Have to watch my video. Our construction project on the church. It was the whack heard around the world, man. When I hit that thing with that sledgehammer, it was just absolutely devastating, and hairline fractures emanated from the point of contact, from the area of impact. None of this is going to be funny. You're going to be looking at me bewildered right now unless you've seen these two videos I made, first two videos, to know what I'm making fun of. All right, now we can skip ahead here. You get the idea. That's going to repeat itself many times, that basic formula of few fighting against many, and these impressive battles. All right, and so there's a lot of, you know, religious piety here amongst these guys. They aren't just a bunch of, you know, roughnecks here. They fasted that day, put on sackcloth, sprinkled ashes. We're still in chapter 3, but we're at verse 46. And look at these guys. These are men of prayer. Who says real men can't pray? These guys are tough guys. And here they are on their knees. They fasted that day, put on sackcloth, sprinkled ashes on their heads, rent their clothes, and they opened the book of the law to inquire into these matters about which the Gentiles were consulting the image of their idols. They also brought the garments of the priesthood and the first fruits of the tithes, and they stirred up the Nazarites. And they cried aloud to heaven, how will we be able to withstand them if thou dost not help us? They cry out to the Lord. And then they sounded the trumpet and gave a loud shout. It's kind of like Joshua, going around Jericho. People are shouting and blowing trumpets. But as his will in heaven may be, so he will do. That's how chapter 3 ends. Now, gorgeous. Not gorgeous as in beautiful, but this guy, Gorgias. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Gorgias. I just say gorgeous, but I don't know if I'm saying it. Gorgeous is this another commander, and he's going to come down and fight against them. And they do the same thing, blow their trumpet and blast them and hammer them. And they plunder them and all that. And this guy Lysias is like, he's in charge of this whole operation, I guess. And in verse 27, he's like, when he heard it, he was perplexed and discouraged, for things had not happened to Israel as he had intended, nor had they turned out as the king had commanded him. He's going to get it. So anyway, it's not working out for these guys. They're up against this little ragtag band of Highlanders. But they just can't seem to get a W under their belt with these guys. See. So then they let us go to cleanse the sanctuary and dedicate it. So they go up and they drive all the enemies out of Jerusalem. They retake Jerusalem. And they cleanse the temple, and they rededicate it, and they light lamps on the lampstand, and these lights they gave light to the temple, and that's that's the menorah lamp that we associate with Hanukkah. Okay, it's connected with what's happening right here in chapter 4 of First Maccabees. They finished all the work they had undertaken, and then in verse 59, they have this 8-day feast. And then Judas and his brothers and all the assembly of Israel determined that every year at that season, the days of the dedication of the altar, the Hanukkah of the altar, should be observed with gladness and joy for 8 days, beginning the 25th day of the month of Chislev. This is interesting. So then they start whooping up on the Edomites in chapter 5, the sons of Esau. These guys, because they kept lying in wait for Israel, Edomites are not to. And sound more trumpets and cry aloud in prayer some more. And then this other knucklehead wants to make a name for himself. In chapter 5, verse 57 is interesting. Joseph, this particular guy named Joseph, is going to go make a name for himself. He's one of the Israelites, and he wants to go make a name for himself, but he's going to get his butt kicked. He is going to get it. It's not going to work out too good for him, because he didn't listen to Judas and his brothers, and he suffered a great rout, thinking he was going to do a brave deed, but his intentions were impure. He was trying to make a name for himself. And he, on that day, some of the priests, this is interesting. Oh man, I better watch out. Verse 67 in chapter 5. has to do with the priests now. On that day, some priests who wished to do a brave deed fell in battle, for they went out to battle unwisely. I guess the priests shouldn't be doing that business. You know, I'd like to fight, but we can't be killing people. Catholic priests shouldn't be doing that. I know there's incidents where that type of thing has happened. That whole business in Mexico during the persecution, there were priests who took up arms. Forget the name of that movie I saw. But it's really counterintuitive to see a priest taking up a gun and leveling it on another man. Okay? Somebody who stands in the person of Christ, who said, if you take up the sword, you'll die by the sword. And I'm pretty sure he dies in the end. And then there's the priest, that's played by Robert, De Niro. Robert De Niro plays a priest in that great movie, The Mission. And the Portuguese come and try to overthrow the mission and destroy it. And, a couple of the priests, namely Robert De Niro and Liam Neeson is the other priest. And Jeremy Irons is another priest. These three Jesuit priests, Robert De Niro and Liam Neeson, take up arms to fight against the Portuguese, whereas Jeremy Irons says, nah, I'm not going to fight. They all die. But Robert De Niro and Liam Neeson die, after trying to win by force of arms. And it doesn't work and they get killed. Jeremy Irons, I think, does the more priestly thing. And he leads the people in adoration, and then he's processing with the Eucharist and the monstrance when he is killed. So they all die, they're all martyred, but there's something more holy, more sacred, more priestly in what Jeremy Irons did, I would maintain. Even though I want to fight, I got that in my blood. I've been in plenty of fights in my life. I reached a boiling point like Mattathias, okay? I was a wrestler. I've put people on the ground in real combat. I've been, even in college, in high school, in elementary school, I went to tough schools. I grew up in a tough neighborhood, and I have punched people in the face, and I've been punched in the face. So anyway, I've thought about joining the military. I thought about being a cop. I have that in me, definitely. All that being said, I think I can handle myself. Somebody ever breaks into the rectory, it's probably not a good idea. I do have a baseball bat next to my bed. I will defend myself, for crying out loud. But the point is, what is the point I'm trying to make here? The point is, it's much more noble. What Jeremy Irons did is what I would want to do. I would want to take up the Blessed Sacrament and imitate Christ in that way. That's the more manly thing to do, in my opinion. They acted unwisely. Interesting, isn't it? These priests. In verse 67, these priests who wished to do a brave deed fell in battle, for they went out to battle unwisely. Enough about that. Chapter 6, I like this. Antiochus Epiphanes is going to get it here. He's going to die. And I love his closing, his final words. He sounds kind of repentant. But he says, verse 8, when the king heard this news, he was astounded and badly shaken. He took to his bed and became sick from grief, because things had not turned out for him as he had planned. The monkey in the wrench, the fly in the ointment. God had other plans, and it didn't coincide with old Epiphanes. He lay there for many days. because deep grief continuously gripped him and he concluded that he was dying. But what's interesting, he admits, he knows at the end, I don't know if this is a deathbed conversion or what, but he knows. He says here at the end, I seized all her vessels, all these vessels of silver and gold out of that temple in Jerusalem. Sounds like remorse to me. And he did it without good reason. I mean, this is like a deathbed confession. Without good reason. I sent to destroy the inhabitants of Judah without good reason. That's an admission of guilt in my book. I know that it is because of this that these evils have come upon me, and behold, I am perishing of deep grief in a strange land. Wow. I mean, there's godly grief in there, okay? Godly grief. It's not just worldly grief, like beating up on himself. I mean, I don't hear him talking about God here, but St. Paul makes a key distinction between worldly grief and godly grief. And I see there's contrition, there's sorrow for sin here. I hope anyway that this is godly grief. I'm praying for Antiochus Epiphanes' conversion right now. I just prayed for him. Hey, God's on the mountaintop. He can apply that prayer back to the 2nd century BC if he wants to. I just prayed for the conversion of Antiochus Epiphanes. That's kind of cool. Okay, then he designates his successor here, this guy Philip, who gets his name changed to Eupator, which means good father, good child of a father, or something like that. Yeah, no, good father. Patior, Pator, whatever, Patior, father, and, you attach that little EU on the front of it. He named him Eupator. Lysias learned that the king was dead, and he takes the king's son, Philip, puts his crown, robe, and signet on him, and crosses over into eternity to stand before the Son of Man. Old Epiphanes. I hope he's over there. I hope he makes it. But didn't look good for him. But, you never know. All right, so now they come against him with even bigger and bigger armies, and he keeps winning battles one after another, and they send more and more and more. And there's this guy, Alchemist. He's this really evil guy. He wants to be the high priest, and he allies himself with, these other successors to the Antiochus Epiphanes. There's a whole run of these guys. Demetrius is a big one. Okay, but there's a whole bunch of different generals, friends of the king, different characters. It really gets hard to keep it all straight, so I'm not even going to try. Bacchides and Nicanor and all these guys, okay? One thing that's interesting here is in chapter 8, I had mentioned in the introductory portion that there was, positive things said about the Romans that probably rubbed the Jews the wrong way. And that's why they kept this thing out of the canon. But I find this interesting, for historical reasons, just reading this description of the Romans. It's already been interesting to hear in the Bible them talking about the Greeks. Okay, I mean, this is more recent history. This is getting close to the turn of the millennia. The Greeks, and now the Romans. We're hearing about this in the scriptures, in the Old Testament, about the Romans, even before Julius Caesar, before there's an emperor. This is pre-Julius Caesar, ancient Rome. Okay, when Rome was ruled by a senate, and how unique this was in the world. I mean, how fascinating this system of governance was. You can see that they kind of admire it here from afar. Now Judas heard of the fame of the Romans, that they were very strong and were well disposed toward all who made an alliance with them, that they pledged friendship to those who came to them. and that they were very strong, and that they defeated the Gauls, okay, in France. Isn't this cool? And they went to the land of Spain, and they got control of their silver and gold mines and so on. They had gained control of the whole region by their planning and patience, governance, administration, organization, legislation. Those were the strengths of the Roman Empire, man. They were very practical people, really good at administration and governance, planning and patience. Wow, interesting descriptions here. Chapter 8, verse 14. Yet for all this, not one of them put on a crown or wore purple as a mark of pride. In other words, there was no emperor, but they have built for themselves a Senate chamber. And every day, 320 senators constantly deliberate concerning the people to govern them well. That's so interesting. There is no envy or jealousy among them. I'm sure there is, boss. I'm sure there is. So, yeah. So they send to Rome, and they send emissaries to Rome, okay, to kind of make friends with the Romans, because, you know, these waves of armies coming against them, it's just getting worse and worse. From the north, from the south, they're getting it from all over the place. And poor Israel. It's like a ping pong ball in between these two great civilizations coming at them. So they cry out to Rome and to Sparta. It's another interesting thing. But they form an alliance with Rome here. And anyway, it's just interesting. So Demetrius keeps trying to fight them and stuff. And then, Judas Maccabees is going to get killed. He falls in chapter 9. Judas Maccabees finally goes down, falls in battle. So Jonathan, his brother, takes over. Then Alexander Epiphanes, he's fighting, he's leading this war against Demetrius. There's like this internecine battle going on up there, and the Maccabees have to decide whose side they're going to be on. They happen to choose the right side, and Alexander wins the battle, but then Demetrius wins it back eventually. I mean, it just kind of goes back and forth. This is where the book starts to drag a little bit for me. There's all these intermarriages and all this back and forth. I don't know how much I want to really. They go back to Rome, then they go to the Spartans, and there's a correspondence going back and forth, and some of that's interesting. I mean, I'm not saying it isn't interesting. It's worth reading. Of course it's worth reading, folks. Of course it's worth reading. Just got to figure out what else I want to. I like this letter from the Spartans. You know, there's peace at the end. You know, you wish the happy music would come up. You just want this thing to end. It's just like, one battle after another. Now, there's an interesting letter from Rome in chapter 14 that is actually really fascinating. It's really long letter from Rome that goes on for the longest time. And it's like, it's just fascinating, folks. Definitely notice that when you're reading through this, the description, this letter of the Romans. I can't get over it. And I might wrap this up right there because I've gone on long enough, and I hit some of the most important parts, and hopefully gave you a little flavor of the book. Hopefully I didn't discourage you from reading it. I want you all to read this book. You got to do it at least once in your life. And get your highlighter out. And there's things you can mine out of this book. But I think we're going to enjoy Second Maccabees. Has a lot more theological, spiritual content. And it's very edifying and rich. So we'll look forward to that next. It's written on a more popular level, as I said. It's very dramatic and passionate. So see you next time. God bless you.